The 2nd of August 1978, Niagara Falls, New York. Families are told to leave their homes, taking no more than they can carry. Children who were playing in their backyards just days before would suddenly find themselves living in emergency shelters. There was no earthquake. No war started. The danger was always there, buried beneath their streets. For years, thousands of tons of toxic chemical waste silently seeped into the neighborhood, and what began as a community's nightmare would unleash one of the worst environmental disasters in American history. Before the Love Canal became a symbol of an environmental disaster, it began as an ambitious engineering dream. In the 1890s, entrepreneur William T. Love envisioned building a canal that would connect the upper and lower Niagara rivers, bypassing Niagara Falls, generating cheap hydroelectric power, and creating a model industrial city. The project attracted investors and headlines, but changing economic conditions and the rise of alternating current electricity made the idea financially unsustainable. Construction was halted after only a short section of the canal was excavated. For decades, the unfinished canal remained largely abandoned. Then came World War II. Between 1942 and 1953, the Hooker Electrochemical Company, later known as the Hooker Chemical Company, obtained permission to use the abandoned canal as a disposal site for industrial waste. During those 11 years, the company buried approximately 21,000 tons of chemical waste within the canal. The waste contained hundreds of different chemical compounds, including chlorinated hydrocarbons, benzene derivatives, caustic substances, pesticides, and byproducts from chemical production. Many of these substances were either not well understood at the time or considered acceptable under the industrial waste practices of the era. After filling the canal, Hooker covered the waste with layers of clay and soil. The company believed the chemicals were permanently contained underground, but even Hooker realized that disturbing the area could be dangerous. In 1953, the company sold the land to the Niagara Falls Board of Education for just $1. The deed contained clear warnings that hazardous chemical waste remained buried beneath the property. It also included legal clauses designed to absolve the company of future liability should the land be excavated or developed. Despite these warnings, the pressure from the post-war population proved stronger. Schools were needed, new neighborhoods were expanding, affordable land was becoming increasingly valuable. In just a few years, construction crews began transforming the former chemical waste site into something entirely different. A primary school sprang up right next to the buried waste. Streets were paved, underground infrastructure was laid. Hundreds of detached houses sprang up on the surrounding land. Almost no one who moved into the neighborhood knew what lay beneath their foundations. The canal had disappeared. But, in fact, it had never really disappeared. By the 1960s, Love Canal had become a symbol of the American dream. Tree-lined streets, affordable homes, children riding bikes after school, neighbors mowing their lawns on weekends. For families moving into the neighborhood, this was where they would build a future. But beneath their feet, the past refused to stay buried. The construction of roads, sewer lines, ditches, and building foundations had eroded the clay barrier that once separated chemical waste from the surface. Over time, rainwater and melting snow slowly seeped into the buried dump, carrying toxic chemicals upstream and into the surrounding community. Residents began to notice strange things. After heavy rains, an oily black liquid appeared in backyards. Chemical odors rose from basements. Brightly colored residue appeared in puddles where children played. Some reported metal objects rusting unusually quickly. Others described vegetation drying out for no apparent reason. Initially, these occurrences were dismissed as isolated problems, but the situation could no longer be ignored. Parents reported numerous unexplained illnesses. Children developed persistent skin rashes after playing outside. Headaches, respiratory irritation, and eye irritation became common complaints. Families quietly spoke about miscarriages, birth defects, and illnesses that seemed to affect multiple households on the same street. Most doctors treated each case individually. Few suspected that the neighborhood itself might be making people sick. As concerns grew, local authorities ordered environmental testing. The results were extremely alarming. Researchers detected numerous hazardous chemicals in the soil, groundwater, the air inside basements, and even in the stormwater sewage system. Many of the compounds had spread far beyond the original landfill. The pollution was no longer underground. It had entered people's homes. Scientists documented evidence of chemical vapors rising from the foundations, while contaminated groundwater continued to spread beneath residential blocks. Each rain increased the likelihood of more toxic substances escaping from the buried landfill. The greatest danger for the families in Love Canal remained invisible. You couldn't always see it. You couldn't always smell it. But it was slowly seeping into almost every aspect of daily life. The neighborhood had been built on top of an industrial waste site. Now, the waste was beginning to reclaim the neighborhood. In 1978, a citizen refused to accept official assurances. Her name was Lois Gibbs. She wasn't a scientist, nor was she a politician. At 27, she was a mother whose young son, Michael Gibbs, attended 99th Street Elementary School, built next to a former chemical waste disposal site. When Michael began experiencing persistent health problems, Gibbs asked school officials to transfer him to another school. This request was, of course, denied. Officials insisted there was no evidence that the school posed an unusual risk. This answer wasn't enough for Lois Gibbs. She started knocking on doors. One house became 10 houses. 10 houses became 100 houses. As she spoke with her neighbors, disturbing similarities emerged. Families spoke of repeated miscarriages. Children suffered from unexplained illnesses. Pets unexpectedly became ill or died. Many households shared stories too similar to be a coincidence. Gibbs meticulously documented every conversation. He drew maps, he recorded addresses, he compared illnesses street by street. Without formal scientific training, he began collecting evidence that no state agency had yet gathered in a single location. Soon, hundreds joined him. The community held public meetings, signed petitions, and demanded independent investigations. Local officials were cautious. State agencies acknowledged the pollution but debated how serious the health risks were. Meanwhile, families continued to live atop thousands of tons of buried chemical waste. National media soon arrived in Niagara Falls. Television cameras showed leaking chemicals contaminated backyards, and frightened residents demanding answers. The Love Canal was no longer a local dispute. It had become a national story. Scientists from the New York State Department of Health and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency (EPA) expanded their investigations. Their findings contributed to the growing concern. Numerous hazardous chemicals had spread far beyond the main landfill. Some substances were even detected inside homes. Others surfaced in groundwater and stormwater drainage systems throughout the neighborhood. As pressure mounted, the crisis reached the highest levels of government. Residents no longer believed the assurances. They wanted action, and they refused to leave until the country listened to them. By the summer of 1978, the evidence was no longer to be ignored. State health officials had concluded that the pollution posed a serious threat to public health. Chemicals had escaped from the original landfill and spread into the soil, groundwater, storm drains, and residential areas. The crisis reached New York Governor Hugh Carey. On the 2nd of August 1978, Governor Carey announced that pregnant women and families with young children living closest to the landfill had to be immediately evacuated. This was an extraordinary decision, acknowledging that the government could no longer guarantee the safety of residents. For many families, this announcement was both a relief and a nightmare. Finally, they were being told the truth, but they were also being asked to leave behind the homes they had built over years. Transportation trucks filled the streets, children filled their bedrooms, families moved their photos, clothes, and mementos to temporary housing, unsure if they would ever return. But hundreds of other residents were trapped within the boundaries of the evacuation zone. Many believed the danger extended far beyond the official maps. The community refused to give up the fight. Throughout 1979 and 1980, residents continued to organize protests, confront government officials, and demand the relocation of every affected family. Scientific studies continued to reveal evidence of widespread chemical spillover. Public confidence was shattered. Then came the federal government's decision. On the 21st of May 1980, President Jimmy Carter declared a federal emergency at Love Canal. This was the first time in United States history that a federal emergency had been declared for a disaster caused by hazardous chemical waste rather than a natural disaster. This declaration opened the way for federal funding for additional evacuations and permanent relocation efforts. Hundreds more families left their homes. All the streets fell silent. Windows were boarded up. Playgrounds were deserted. The neighborhood, once the epitome of post-war suburban America, was slowly turning into a ghost town. But the story of Love Canal was no longer just about a neighborhood. It had revealed a dangerous loophole in America's environmental laws, and this discovery would change the country forever. The Love Canal clearance resolved one crisis, but it also revealed another. As federal authorities investigated similar industrial sites across the United States, they discovered that Love Canal was not an isolated incident. Thousands of abandoned hazardous waste sites had been created during decades of rapid industrial growth, many dangerously close to homes, schools, and drinking water sources. America had a national problem, but it lacked a national system to deal with it. The public outrage following Love Canal reached Congress. Lawmakers realized that existing environmental regulations were not designed to address abandoned hazardous waste sites, whose original owners were often bankrupt, defunct, or unwilling to pay for cleanup. A new solution was needed. On the 11th of December 1980, President Jimmy Carter signed the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Accountability Act, more commonly known as CERCLA. Most Americans simply call it the Superfund Act. For the first time, the federal government gained broad powers to identify contaminated areas, fund emergency cleanups, and recover costs from companies responsible for the pollution as much as possible. The law also established a national priority list of the country's most dangerous hazardous waste sites. Love Canal became one of the first and most recognizable sites on this list. Over the following decades, billions of dollars were invested in environmental research and remediation projects across the United States. Thousands of contaminated properties were inspected, hundreds were remediated. Many are still monitored today. Love Canal itself underwent years of environmental remediation. Large sections of contaminated land were contained. Protective drainage systems and barriers were installed. Long-term groundwater monitoring became part of the site's management. While some nearby areas were reopened for limited residential use after extensive remediation and ongoing environmental review, the central landfill remains permanently contained and carefully monitored. Today, Love Canal is remembered not just for the catastrophe that unfolded beneath a neighborhood, but for the lasting changes that impacted an entire nation. It proved that industrial pollution doesn't disappear just because it's buried. It showed that ordinary citizens can uncover truths that powerful institutions ignore. And it told governments around the world that the true cost of hazardous waste is often paid decades after it's been hidden. Love Canal began as an engineering dream. It became one of America's greatest environmental warnings, and almost half a century later, its lessons remain buried only in history, not in the law. Love Canal was never just about one neighborhood. It became proof that what is buried today can shape the lives of tomorrow's generations. Thousands of families paid the price for decisions made decades before they were even born. Their struggle changed environmental law, transformed government oversight, and forced the world to rethink the true cost of industrial progress. But Love Canal is not just history. Thousands of former industrial sites around the world are still being monitored, and new environmental challenges continue to emerge. The lesson remains the same. Pollution doesn't disappear just because it's hidden. Sometimes the most dangerous disasters are those that no one can see. If you found this story informative, consider subscribing for more documentaries that uncover forgotten events that changed our world. Because history isn't just written by what happened, it's also written by what was buried.